Well, hello to anyone who has joined us. Uh, my name is Don Taylor, and I'm a professor at the School for Workers at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And you've joined us for our monthly webcast, a live interview program called Labor Forward. Just by way of a quick announcement, I'll remind folks that this is our last Labor Forward of the academic year. We'll be taking the summer off and we'll be back in the fall. Our guest today is Peter Rickman of the Milwaukee Area Service and Hospitality Workers Organization. And I would assume you call yourself MASH for short, so you don't have to say the name over and over and over again. Welcome, Peter.
Thanks for having me, Don, for the thrilling season finale. It's great to be here. And just, before we get into anything else, I got to say, for folks who are tuned in, it's a real pleasure to be part of the School for Workers in any way. It's such a proud history and tradition, and folks like you carrying forward into the 21st century, that important mission of labor studies and labor education. So thank you for what you guys do at the School for Workers.
Thank you. Thank you. We're actually, I think, 2 years away from our 100th anniversary. So we'll have to start planning the big celebration, and I'm sure you'll be invited.
We'll bring the hospitality and the service.
That's right. Right. Well, for folks online that may not be very familiar with MASH, and again, you didn't correct me, so I assume you folks use that name.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Why don't you just give us a general introduction and tell us about the organization and what you folks do?
I think, aside from anything about MASH as an institution and our members and our work over the last few years since our founding, it's really important to understand the context of what gave birth to this organization, because MASH is an organization that arose out of the circumstances and the lives of working class people in the service and hospitality industry here in Milwaukee. I think most people who would be watching this are familiar with the fact that Milwaukee is a union town. This is one of the places that not only helped give rise to the CIO, but had a vibrant AFL and CIO tradition in the factories and foundries that once employed literally tens of thousands of people across the city. It was a strong union town, but those jobs are gone. They're not coming back in a lot of ways. And so Milwaukee went from one of the places that was building an equitable economy. It was actually considered one of the best places in America for Black folks and other people of color to raise families because of the bevy of union jobs. It's gone from that to being considered literally the worst place in America for working class people of color to raise a family. That's not coincidental, that's causal. When you lose tens of thousands of good union jobs that pay living wages and provide economic security, it also provides something of social stability and a chance for everyone to thrive. And now this is the heart of an income inequality economy that every city around the country seems to know too well. Milwaukee's been on the leading edge for good and for ill. And part of that was not just the loss of those good union jobs in factories and foundries. It's been the explosion of low wage, insecure, no benefit service sector work. So what was once a union town in factories and foundries is now in food service and restaurants and cleaning. The explosion of service sector work in this economy has been non-union, low wage, sweated labor. So you had that dynamic here that unfortunately is too common, again, not just in cities around the country, but in communities across Wisconsin. So for a group of us who'd been working on transforming service sector work for some time, it seemed like we needed to build a new model. And I think you probably know that a group of people from New York, hedge fund, private equity, and real estate folks, bought the Milwaukee Bucks in 2014, 2015. And they said, you might have heard this kind of thing before. We need a new stadium or else we're going to move the team. And by the way, we want you all, the taxpayers, to foot the bill for it. And a group of us who'd been working on economic and racial justice here in Milwaukee came together and said, this is the time where we should demand a new model for service and hospitality work. And let's make sure that whatever comes out of this is a good deal for good jobs that actually provides living wage union work for people from our neighborhoods who've been not just left behind, but have been the victims of social and economic violence. And we ran a campaign to win a community benefits agreement to secure exactly that. I'll fast forward a little bit here, Don. We won. We took on the billionaires. We beat them. We won a landmark community benefits agreement guaranteeing living wage union jobs for folks in the arena and the surrounding development, the real estate projects that would come up. And so we needed to build an organization to implement it, to be a hiring hall, to be a worker center, and to be a union, to organize and represent folks. And so some of us got together and said, let's build the union of our dreams. Let's build the organization that we've wanted to see in the service and hospitality industry. Bottom up, member driven, democratic trade unionism to take on the fights with the bosses and bring them to the table in a way that finds collaboration on our terms as well too. And so for the past 4 or 5 years, that's exactly what we've been doing in building MASH. So this is a response to the conditions and the needs of the service and hospitality working class here in Milwaukee. And we hope that it can be a model that can grow and expand, and the MA part drops away. Instead of being the Milwaukee Area Service and Hospitality Workers Organization, we can become something bigger and broader than that.
Cool. Cool. Thank you. And thank you for setting that context. I think that's important for folks to realize that, this is in many ways a response or an adaptation to the continuing reality of deindustrialization. And Milwaukee is perhaps one of the prime examples of that, along with places like Youngstown and other places. I was just thinking about a book recently by Sherry Lincoln called The Half-Life of Deindustrialization, where she talks about how deindustrialization isn't a historical artifact, a thing, an event of the past. It continues to have a toxicity in communities, working class communities around the country. And I think what you're describing with your organization is in many ways a response or an effort to grow forward out of that. Yeah,
absolutely. I think about my hometown of Neenah, and it's a paper mill country and a machine shop to the Fox Valley, at least it was. And there's this one site that I can think of as the Gladfelter Mill, downtown Neenah. Right on the river. It's once one of those foundries and factories that produced tens of thousands of living wage union jobs in places like Milwaukee and across Wisconsin. It's gone. It's not coming back. It's been demolished, knocked down, and it's been replaced by another development. They're a nice boxy sort of thing that has within it a giant call center. It's very indicative. And if you look at the old American Motors plant in Milwaukee, shut down. It's been replaced by a Walmart. The old Alice Chalmers plant, huge place, incredibly significant in the labor movement. And for us on the left of the labor movement, it's gone. And it's also been replaced by a shopping center with a bunch of these, large scale, big box retail outfits. And these are the things that continue to produce and reproduce an income inequality economy. And unless and until we transform those low wage service sector jobs that have replaced those union jobs, living wage union jobs in factories and foundries, until we transform these jobs today and tomorrow into good union jobs, we are going to produce more and more of the economic inequality that then just breeds further and further inequities throughout society. And I just want to remind folks, I don't think I'm saying anything to you, Don, that you don't know, but it's not as if union jobs were just coming down, factory and foundry jobs came down from on high as if they were great jobs. Those were the dirty and dangerous jobs of the 19 teens and 20s. The people were like, we got to organize these. We got to get a union in here. Otherwise, this is going to chew us up and kill us in our communities. And it was through pitched struggle that the industrial working class transformed them into good union jobs and built what was the first middle class in the history of this planet. Wasn't perfect. It was something that trade unionists were working to improve in terms of being broadly accessible to folks from the multiracial working class. But people had to fight to turn those into good jobs. They weren't inherently good jobs. Unions made them that. And so that's our model here today in the service and hospitality industry. There's no reason these can't be good jobs. There's no reason these can't be living wage jobs with benefits and dignity, rights, and respect. It's going to be because we transform them with unions and a new model for the service sector and the way those labor markets operate.
I can see the parallels that you're talking about when you mentioned how the industrial jobs that were the backbone of the labor movement at one point in our history. Prior to that, they were the dirty, terrible jobs. The first thing that came to mind for me was the auto industry, and Ford in particular, but the others as well, where those were miserable jobs, and turnover was insanely high, and the industrial union movement was an adaptation by workers and the labor movement to a transformation in the economy. And I see a lot of parallels between that and what you folks are doing, an adaptation to a transformation in the economy.
Well, and it's something that I think, as the rate of transformation in the economy and in what constitutes work and labor markets, it's all the more important that working class people build institutions and organizations that are adaptive to what those circumstances are and what working people need. And I think that's what we've tried to do. And that's, when we lay down at night, I hope all of us who are involved in this organization put ourselves to sleep thinking about that. Gives you the warm feeling. But there's a reason we're not just a conventional trade union. And I mean no disrespect to conventional trade unions. I'm a conventional trade unionist at heart. But we're working to do more than simply organize, have power, win contracts, defend and enforce those contracts, bargain new ones. You can tell by the bags under my eyes here, Don, that we're in the middle of bargaining 2 contracts that cover the vast majority of our membership. I'm a believer in contracts and defending and enforcing them, and we take a lot of pride in being quite good at that. And by the way, in a right to work state, our membership numbers are well over 90%. But we have to do more than that to meet the needs of the service sector working class. There are some things baked into the cake around service sector work right now in our industries, where mostly these are going to be part-time jobs. So people have to work across multiple part-time work sites. So we're building an organization that will relate to employers, multiple employers, and a whole industry across work sites without regard for any of that kind of thing, because that's what workers need. If you're a cook or you're a server or you're a bartender at the heart of the industry, if you're on your own trying to figure out this work site and that work site, this employer, that employer, to figure out your hours and your schedule, that's almost a part-time job in and of itself. But that across multiple part-time jobs, you'll never cross the threshold for employer provided benefits. And you're going to deal with different economic standards across each of them. Now, employers in the industry also are scrambling, especially these days with the total shift in the hospitality labor market, for figuring out workers to meet their needs. What if, for example, at the center of the labor market, there was something that related to those employers and related to workers, and bargain an industry-wide contract that says, if you employ someone, Mr. Employer, for 20 hours a week, you're going to contribute 50% of the cost of their benefits package. And you're going to pay them the exact same thing that every other employer in the industry would do as well. And so we can put at the center of the labor market something that meets the needs of workers and employers alike, raises the bar, improves job quality, and meets the needs of a chaotic and friction-filled labor market, and adapts to the times. That's the kind of organization we're trying to build, because that's what workers need. Just a site-by-site, banana stand by banana stand conventional trade union won't work for service sector workers, just like craft unionism would not work for the industrial workers of the 1930s.
Exactly. The AFL unions at the time were unable and unwilling to organize the unskilled assembly line workers. That was the major growth sector of the workforce at the time. And again, you're not doing it in the same way, but the parallels are obvious. That that was a major transformation, and the labor movement was slow to adapt. And that's what's always happened historically, as the economy restructures and workers find a way to adapt. And now we're in a time where everyone has known for a long time that we're transitioning from an industrial economy to a service economy, and in the same way that there was a time lag for workers to figure it out and transform and find some new way of exercising voice and power, the same is now true of the service sector, which is now the dominant part of our economy.
Hmm.
The I lost my train of thought briefly there, but you get my point.
Yeah.
When I teach labor history classes, you inevitably end up, what's the end of the story, or when you talk about what's going on today, you end up talking about, union density is about to drop below 10%. In terms of a percentage of the economy, we're weaker than ever. And, it's hard to end a labor history class on an up note. But the way to do that is to talk about the fact that workers and workers organizations have always figured out these transformations before. And, the next labor movement is out there somewhere. And in 1929, 1930, 1931, everybody thought the labor movement was on its deathbed, but we can now see that the seeds were hatching of what became the labor movement of the golden era of the U.S. economy. And so I always tell folks, don't despair, because the next labor movement, we probably have we've caught sight of it, what it's going to look like. And things like what your organization is doing, I think, are the potential beginnings of whatever that next labor movement is going to look like.
Well, there's also, I think as a fellow lover of and student of labor history, avocationally, not vocationally, like you, there's an important obligation, I think, for people who are trying to build the future to look at the past, not only to build from that analysis of, what was the CIO doing as compared to the AFL, building industrial union as opposed to craft unionism based upon the contours of capitalism at the time. But also looking at some of the models that might be out there in the United States, elsewhere. Comparative labor studies actually does matter. And by the way, trade unionists, come on, we got to read some books and keep up with what's happened in the past and analyses, including by people like you, and the journals that are out there where folks are, taking scholarly lessons and trying to apply them to our current moment. You've got a hell of a bookshelf behind you there, Don. I want to come over and check some of those out. If we were at my home office, you'd see my my home office / gym / library filled with all these titles. I think I got a Sherry Lincoln one in there somewhere. But over on my bookshelf here, I keep a copy of a favorite of mine about the Fur and Leather Workers Union. And one of the reasons why is that I think for people in the service and hospitality realm, and the service industry is very broad. We're focused on hospitality, food and beverage, that kind of stuff. There's so much more to be learned from the work of the needle trades than there is of the auto workers. Don't get me wrong. I did finally drop out of grad school and law school when I realized the thing I was most interested in, the auto workers, had already been said intelligently by people far smarter than me. So I have a tremendous respect for the history of the auto workers union, amongst so many others. But for me, the history of the needle trades unions is fascinatingly applicable today. Cutthroat competition, lots of employers in one industry. And it took essentially an industry-wide sectoral bargaining approach, the likes of which I had just described, to bring something of stability for the employers to the industry, while transforming this from being quite literally where we get the term sweatshop to like the bedrock of a middle class amongst marginalized workers. Immigrant workers, the othered workers of, there's a reason why the history of the needle trades union is filled with Jewish folks, because that was an othered grouping that worked a lot there, along with other immigrant populations. It's fascinating.
And women.
Exactly. It dominated by women. Well, not that the union leadership was, but that's another story for another time. But we have to draw from these examples and think about what we can do with that here today. And it's by the way, quite fitting that the Starbucks workers union drive is being led by the successor to the needle trades, because I think they're using some of those exact same approaches. And so we consider ourselves connected to that kind of labor movement as well. And one point I just want to underscore to what you're saying here, Don, is, the future of the labor movement is being written today. It's not all despair. Yes, there's the Starbucks workers campaign, but there's so many things out there. Our last union organizing drive across 6 work sites with one employer, we won that election with 94% of workers voting yes. There's 2 people. There are 2 people in that unit dozens of workers, 2 people over the age of 30.
Yeah.
Do you know what those conversations were like, talking to people about what it is to form a union? They generally have some idea of what unions are, but here's what they do know. They know that bosses typically have all the power in the service and hospitality industry, and unions are a way for workers to come together to balance that power out and sit down at the table and negotiate a binding legal contract on the things that matter to them. They don't give a rip about what's in every other union contract in the world. They loved the idea that they would come together, have that power balanced out, and amongst themselves decide on what matters to them and go to the table as equals with the employer and talk about what contract they needed for their industry. If we can build from that basis of what the union is for workers in the service sector, this large and growing part of our economy, I think we can actually build union density and build organizations like this. And it won't be just like what we are, but it'll be lots of different types of new forms of work organization, learning from those examples of the past, but applying it to where workers are at today and what's at the core of who we are. People coming together to balance the power with the boss class.
All I can say to that is, wow.
You don't disagree,
absolutely.
huh?
No, not in the slightest. The power dynamic, the power shift you're describing. When I teach organizing, I always talk about why workers form and join unions. What are the ends that they're ultimately looking for? And when you ask anybody, not just a union member, but just a person off the street, why do workers form unions? They'll usually say things like, well, they want better pay or better hours, and those are all true.
Mm-hmm.
But the umbrella that kind of sweeps over all of those is that without a union, who decides? And as you say, the boss, right?
Mm-hmm.
And those of us that work in industrial relations often talk about the voice function being kind of like the overriding motivation for workers forming a union. It's the wages and benefits and time off and being treated with respect are all subsets of having a voice on the job that in some way shifts power from the employer to the workers. And then the thing that varies is to what extent does that shift occur? Are the workers strong enough to shift the power significantly, or is the power shift less significant because they're not well organized? But in either case, the point is to shift the power.
There's an important notion of power that I have found, and this has fascinated me amongst our work of the last couple of years. And here's the point that I want people to be able to take away from this. Working people in the service and hospitality industry, in our experience, want an organization that has, exercises, and continues to build power. And the workers that we've been engaged with have really emphasized the organization part. I just mentioned this last organizing campaign that we won the board election and delivered a strong first contract, very strong first contract.
Oh, can we say who that was with?
Oh yeah, that was PTG
Pabst.
Live Events, the Pabst Theater Group, across multiple venues and growing, by the way. And by the way, if you are seeing a concert in Milwaukee these days, the likelihood that the people who are doing the work, not just on stage, but the folks who are doing the work are union is something like 92%.
Wow.
That's an interesting way to think about union density in the entertainment industry here. There were a group of people who ultimately were strong yes votes during that, who hadn't worked there particularly long, but they had worked somewhere else here in Milwaukee, that coming out of the period of time when the pandemic was at its worst and folks were heading back to restaurants to work and to actually eat in person. There was a place around here. I'm not going to go into that particular, so please don't ask me that, to protect the folks who are involved, were involved then. But they had problems with the boss, and they came to us looking for help. And this is part of our worker center function. We said, absolutely, we'll help you understand your rights. We'll help you pursue them. And ultimately that got to the point where they chose to withdraw their labor. They struck for things that mattered, on the issues that mattered. And we help coach them, guide them, support them, and do their negotiations with the boss. And we said, look, we're doing this because this is what workers in need have defined for themselves as their path forward. And we educated them a little bit about what a union is as far as building an organization and concretizing, institutionalizing that power. And those workers, and this is their choice, opted not to do that. And we said, that's fine. We're going to still help you through. They won everything they demanded. Fantastic. Great. No written document, no organization to enforce it. Within 2 months, everything that they had struck for, wall-to-wall walkout, indefinite open-ended strike to win their demands, they won, theoretically speaking. They got nothing changed ultimately. And some of those folks ended up working at Pabst Theater Group. And those are some of the people who said, we need an organization and we need a contract. It's not just enough to take up the issues that matter. We need to build that. In our most recent contract campaign run up to go to the bargaining table with folks in the arena district, about 850 to 1,000 workers, depending on how you think about it. And as that development continues to expand even more. Yes, wages. Yes, scheduling hours, staffing piqued people's interest, but almost at exactly the same level of interest for folks was they wanted the contract to guarantee advances in monitoring and enforcement of their contract, defending their rights, and building an organization. There are folks there who said, we'll walk away from the table if this employer tries to do anything to compromise having union representatives coming to talk to us at the worksite every time we show up. It warmed the cockles of my little trade unionist heart, Don. But what I took away from that is that workers these days value the organization of the union, not just the idea of what a union can deliver. And that is a fundamental shift over the past 25 or so years, where people were like, union, good pay, union, benefits, union, rights on the job, union, defend people, whatever. Now, union is organization for power, made up of people like me who will go to bat every day fighting the boss, because that's my reality every day. The boss is coming down on us. And that is fabulously significant for where this labor movement will go over the next 30 years. If people believe in the organization, they will fight to win an organization, not just say they want better pay and benefits and rights on the job.
Great. Yeah, that's so exciting. And it's what we often try to instill in the more seasoned, experienced union members and union organizations, to try to convince them that the model that we've operated in since the 1940s, what we often call the service model, just doesn't cut it anymore. And as a friend of mine once said, we used to arbitrate our way to prosperity, but ultimately there's no there. And it's hard to get somebody who has the who is experienced in the union culture as it exists to conceive of a new way of being an organization. And I've often thought, without saying out loud, that that baggage, that culture is kind of an albatross, and people have a hard time conceptualizing something different. And what you folks are doing is not taking people who have 20 years in at a steel mill or have a preconceived notion, and by that I mean not just service workers as a demographic, but young workers, non-English speaking, immigrant, that kind of are starting more with a clean slate and are able to build the type of organization that everybody should have, which is an it's literally the cliche of, well, we're all the union, we're the union. It's about power, not a rep who takes care of it for you. So it's building something new instead of the constant struggle to change a decades old culture.
Well, it's interesting, Don, we have members that have experience in unions in the past. They've retired from some of those factory and foundry jobs, and they pick up work in the service industry for various different reasons. There's no one way to describe why. And 201, these people are like, I've never seen the union unions generally. I've never seen the union be like this. This is wild. This is great. There's one guy. I don't have his permission to share who he is, so I'm not going to say. He says, I've never been more proud to be a union member, because of the role that the members are supposed to play in this. This is fabulous. This is wild. And the fact that we do more than represent folks in the workplace. He loves that. That we do. And the union is the vehicle for folks like him to combat racist voter suppression. Now, we're not intensely political out there in a lot of different ways in terms of the electoral arena being like a thing we spend all our time in. But for our members who want to be able to exercise their right to vote, if people are trying to bring down opposition to that, they want to fight against that. And if the union is an expression of workers and their interests, well, we're going to take that up if that's what workers want. So this guy has loved the idea of what the union can be. He's got lots of preconceived notions, but for him, this fresh and invigorating sort of difference is exactly that, a way for him to feel excited about the union movement again and jump right back into activism and leadership. There's a guy who came up to me last night, old timer, well-respected person, was a trade unionist, not just a proud dues-paying member, but an elected leader and a chief steward. And he came up to me last night because he's on our bargaining committee. He ran for and won a position on our bargaining committee. He said, you're doing a hell of a job. And it said all these very nice things about what I've been doing, what the union is doing. And it's wild because 3 months ago, he was railing and critiquing, which, by the way, we allow in this union because we think union democracy is part of the power. Workers have to have power inside their organization and have voice inside their organization if they're going to take seriously the idea that they can have power in the workplace and the economy and have voice with their employer. He was railing because he said, why aren't you here doing X, Y, and Z? I mean, I'm there at the worksite pretty much every day. Events-based workers show up. He's like, when this is going on, when the employer does this, you should be there and you should be pounding the table and saying to the employer, no, not on my watch. And I said, I don't think that that's the right way for a union leader to operate. I think what's more powerful is if I work with you all and your colleagues to be the ones that go to the employer and you do the table pounding and you're the one that says, no, not on our watch. He was so used to the idea of the charismatic leader, the union rep who comes in and solves the problems, that he didn't like the idea. It wasn't that he was unwilling to work. He's very willing to work at it. He just wasn't accustomed to that notion. And now a few months later, as he's seen some of this play out, he's like, you know what, this is great. This is how we should be doing it. So yes, there's a ton of people out there who don't have preconceived notions of what the union is, who can be brought into this member-driven democratic bottom-up trade unionism. And there's folks who've been around the other way of doing it who are like, I like this other way too. So I think there's power in this. And by the way, let me close this point here, Don, by saying we will arbitrate our way to prosperity. We'll defend the hell out of the contract. We will do everything we can to fight for a strong contract at the table. I will info request an employer to death. I will make sure that we get everything through the channels of conventional trade unionism that our members need and deserve. Absolutely. But we don't have to counterpose that to engaging workers in being the ones who participate in this and lead this. And so we've prioritized the role of workers in running their union. We fought for and won getting the employer to pay workers to spend time doing the business of the union. And that is a way to meld these two things together. We don't have to counterpose servicing and organizing. We have to say we service the hell out of people to organize them, and we organize them to do their own servicing.
That's awesome. That's great. I mean, that again, the story you told about the guy who had prior union experience, again, it meshes with so much of what I talk about in terms of changing this culture, because we try to preach to, well, we don't, but I mean, unions try to preach to people how they should think differently, or, it's the whole, well, you're the union, we're all the union. And then I always ask, well, how did they then say, oh, I get it now? No, of course not, because telling them, doesn't work. But it's when people have a lived experience with something different, a lived experience with solidarity, that's when the light bulb goes off for them. You and I want to, before you respond, we've been at this for 35 minutes already, and we're running out of time. So I do want to, we've talked some really big picture stuff. I do want to ask you one more question, and then we'll open it up to any questions or comments. We've actually already lost a few people who are probably having to go back to work at the end of their lunch break. But I just wanted that specifically with what you folks are doing, rather than the awesome big picture stuff that we've talked about today and you and I have talked about many times in the past. What's next for your organization? I mean, what not necessarily the grand vision for the future, but in the short and medium term. You said you're in bargaining now, but well, where do you want to be a year from now or 2 years from now, just in terms of the next steps?
It's a pretty weighty question. It's far more difficult to talk about that than the big picture in many ways. Obviously, the big picture animates this.
Well, I'm certainly not trying to get you to reveal any cunning plans. That
no. I mean, I'm happy to talk about it. Look, there's we organizationally, we have three parts: hiring hall, worker center, trade union. We'll always do the work of the worker center. People come to us, need help, absolutely going to help out. I don't know if that's something that we're going to deepen our engagement with the non-union service sector working class through that component. Although who knows what tomorrow will bring, and we shouldn't close off avenues for that. I'd love to be able to deepen the work that we do in terms of engaging employers on the basis of what they need in this labor market with the service and hospitality workforce. 20%, let's say that 20%, 1 in 5 people that pre-COVID-19 worked in the service and hospitality industry is no longer in that labor market for a variety of reasons, including, during COVID, a bunch of boomers who'd been hanging on to particular jobs left and created openings for Gen Xers, millennials to move into other roles in other industries. And so some people who were quote unquote stuck in the hospitality industry jumped elsewhere. It's totally transformed the labor market here. And so employers are scratching their heads, oftentimes saying, this is my paraphrasing, we've tried nothing, we're all out of ideas and nothing works. And so we have an opportunity here as the folks in the labor movement who have the greatest connection to the service and hospitality working class saying, well, here's what you need to do. And so we're working to deepen some of that with a set of employers with whom we also have a collective bargaining relationship. I think that's an important thing, because if we can make that work and maybe advance local policies on the city and county levels here that bring more employers in the sector to the table and say, all right, well, you guys have a problem in the labor market, and what you need to do is relate to something at the center of it that actually has a relationship with workers. I think we could do some really interesting things. But right here, right now, the work of the trade union component to MASH is front and center. So we're bargaining contracts. We intend to deliver, yet again, industry-leading contracts that set the pace, not only in terms of wages and other economics, but also in terms of the way workers relate to work, staffing and scheduling and hours, that guarantee dignity, rights, and respect on the job with a voice. And that's not just sloganeering. That's about building more of a co-operation, co-determination approach to the service and hospitality industry. By the way, Don, if you put a bunch of business grads in charge of management of the service and hospitality industry who've never worked for real in the service and hospitality industry, and you have them direct cooks and cashiers and bartenders and baristas and servers and security guards, things don't go so great. But if you put those workers in charge, or at least on an equal playing field with management, you will have a much better operation that actually does better for the business types. So that's a big part of what we are doing in our contract bargaining. And like I mentioned before, really institutionalizing the role of member-driven democratic trade unionism in the workplace and getting the employer to foot some of the bill for monitoring, enforcing, and implementing the contract, and sort of buying their way to labor peace of workers being in charge of things. So delivering on these contracts and then implementing them is critical. That's the heart of having a real workers organization. We have to do that, and we want to do that, and we take a lot of pride in it. But then it is for us investing in the member leadership. So through the end of the summer and into the next sort of arena season, we have a large-scale steward training program. We have a large-scale member education program. to achieve what we intend is to have 50% of our members be able to quote to an employer or a coworker the entirety of their contract and what it means for them in the workplace. So if we can have stewards who do the monitoring, enforcement, and implementation of the contract at the worksite, and a membership that generally knows what their rights are, then the idea of, again, that servicing versus organizing distinction melts away, because it ain't me doing the servicing. I might be supporting some of the organizing work, but it's members doing that. So building that component to the workforce that we represent, and then that trickles into something else here. And this is the last thing I'll say on this, where we will be a year from now. There are people who've worked in workplaces where MASH represents folks. There are people who are friends with folks who've worked in MASH represented workplaces, and there are people who know about what has happened in MASH represented workplaces. And sometimes they say, hey, we should have that here in this other place. And so we have some active organizing drives that have been coming together. And we don't just take, whoever calls in. Some places it's like, look, it wouldn't make sense for us to do this. We can't do it right by you. By the way, here's some other folks maybe you'd want to talk to.
Right.
But we have some active organizing drives that are about building and deepening our power in the industry here and connecting these workplaces across the industry for the betterment of workers' lives. So there's a lot of places in downtown Milwaukee and across the hospitality, entertainment, and tourism industry that need unions and need an industry-wide solution. So a year from now, Don, I'd love to be back talking with you about how we've added 5 more workplaces with union representation and industry leading contracts. And I think that's where we'll continue to move into the future in that union function of MASH. We're going to win strong contracts. We're going to enforce the heck out of them. We're going to implement them through the leadership of workers. And we're going to continue building the union on the basis of bottom-up, member-driven, democratic trade unionism oriented around what service and hospitality workers need.
Super. Great. Yeah. And let's put that on the calendar. Let's do this again a year from now and you can give us all an update. Well, we ran a little long and I kind of expected that we would, but with
me
and me. We do still have some folks in the audience and I'm curious if anyone has a question or a comment for Peter. Feel free to put it in the chat or the Q&A. And we'll figure out a way to answer anything. I'll give you a few seconds if anything comes up. Otherwise, we'll say good day. I don't like the silence, but I don't want to talk over. Like if I get going again, people will go, oh, he's going to talk. I'm not going to type a question. But nothing.
Bad
I don't
radio,
see.
Right?
Yeah, right. All right. Well, I don't see anything coming through. So I think that concludes our session. Thank you so much, Peter. And thank you to everyone who was with us today. I see a lot of familiar names in the participant list. So I'm glad you folks were able to come and hear about MASH and about Peter and about our grand ideas for the world and the labor movement. Well, any final words, Peter?
I think we lived up to the billing here, Don. The thrilling season conclusion, the season finale here. Yeah. Not the series finale for sure. Definitely just a season finale. It's been thrilling. I've really appreciated the chance to talk with you about this in a way that hopefully, brings to others some ideas, some compelling ideas, some actionable ideas about how we can strengthen and build this union movement, this labor movement, workers movement for the 21st century, because really that's what we're doing. So that 100 years from now, on the 200th anniversary of the School for Workers, people say, yeah, it ebbs and flows. The power of workers goes up and down, but it responds to the nature of the economy and the society in which we live. And it's improved the lives of working class people. We are the ones whose labor not only powers the hospitality industry and every other one, but we're the ones who create the wealth in this world. And through the union movement, we'll get more of what we create. So I'm happy to be part of that tradition, thrilled. And I really think that what the School for Workers is doing is a critical component to that. So again, thank you. It's been a pleasure being with you here today, Don. Same here. And thank you for the superb final comments that I could in no way improve on. Thank you very much, everybody. School for Workers and Labor Forward will be back in the fall. Thank you so much.